Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for spending a little time with us today to discuss this very important topic of the state of the nonprofit community. For those of you that do not know me, I'm Susan Zarek. I'm the Senior Director of Advisor Relations, and I'll be joined by several of my team members today, as well as three very talented nonprofit leaders, which I know is actually why you all joined us this morning. We will be moving fairly quickly, so to respect your time, wanted to just give you an outline of how this hour will look. Steve Maislin, our President and CEO, will be giving an update on where the Community Foundation is. He's going to then turn it over to Renee Wizik-Barrios, who's our Senior Vice President and Chief Philanthropy Officer, and she's going to update us on the Greater Houston COVID Fund that we've been working in conjunction with United Way on. She is also going to share where you can find more in-depth information on a great website that we have as well. She will then turn over to Jennifer Touche, who is she's our Vice President of Individual and Family Philanthropy, and will be framing our conversation, introduce our amazing speakers, and moderate a panel conversation. We will be leaving about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for question and answer. So I did want to go over a few housekeeping items. I know we've all been doing Zoom a lot, but I just want to go over a few items before we do turn it over to Steve. First, please note that this webinar is being recorded. We plan to post this video to share with other advisors who might not have been able to join us this morning, but also we will be sharing it with GHDF donors and clients that might be interested in this topic. Second, we will be sharing our screen for parts of the presentation. And as I think many of you know, you have the capability to enlarge your screen at the top of the page if that is necessary. And finally, we are monitoring questions throughout the webinar. So please submit your questions using the question and answer feature so that all participants can see the questions and the answers. That button is located, as many of you know, again, at the bottom of your screen. And again, we've reserved about 15 minutes at the end. So if your question's not answered, we will do our best to reply to that offline. So please, again, utilize the Q&A function and not the chat box so we can make sure we are capturing that information. And now I will move it on to Steve.
Thank you, Susan, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for sharing your time with us this morning. We really appreciate it. These are, of course, unique and challenging times, and our work, yours, ours, our nonprofit colleagues who are joining us this morning, in many ways are more important than ever before. At the Community Foundation, our purpose is to inspire and create meaningful and positive change with our donors and for our community. And so at GHCF, that means helping our donors, your clients, achieve their philanthropic goals. It means providing accurate and current data about important issues in our community through our Understanding Houston initiative. And of course, very importantly, it means connecting donors to each other, donors to nonprofit organizations doing great work in our donors' areas of interest, and connecting stakeholders throughout our region, donors, advisors, foundations, community leaders, nonprofit leaders, public officials, and others, to have really important conversations, to listen and to learn together as we all seek to make Greater Houston a place that offers opportunity for all. Now, of course, right now, many of these conversations have centered around the pandemic and how we can most effectively respond to support our neighbors and the nonprofits who lead the outreach to the most vulnerable residents of our region. And of course, also the discussions around the tragic killing of George Floyd and elevating the conversation and work around so many important and interrelated issues, including but not limited to racial justice and economic disparity. As we noted in our public statement, we stand with our donors and community partners to support dialogue and healing across the Houston area. As to the mechanics of our work, we continue to have our virtual office open during normal office hours, though as you might expect, many of our staff are working well into the evening and on the weekends, particularly around the COVID work that you're about to hear about. As to plans for our physical office reopening, we have done and continue to do our homework to ensure we are ready to welcome back our staff, probably in rotating teams to start, in small numbers of donors, and with the appropriate modifications you all are probably either planning for or have already implemented. And of course, we're watching the local data to determine the best time to reopen our physical office. In the interim, we're fully functional in serving our donors and your clients in a pretty normal fashion. We're getting gifts into our system and grants out the door within our normal time frame. And we're working toward the implementation of a new software backbone that will strengthen our donor services in multiple ways. Some ways that the donors will not be able to see, but also very visibly in the online donor portal that we offer. And more to come on that in future months. So thanks again for the work you do in our community. Thanks for your support of the Community Foundation. And thanks for joining us this morning. Renee?
Good morning. Thank you, Steve. Thanks to all of you for joining us. I saw many of your names in the participant area, and I'm glad to virtually see you, even though I don't get to see you on the screen, but glad to know that you're here and you're present. We've been hearing from you, and I know Susan has been in touch with a lot of you, but we certainly miss seeing all of you and collaborating in person. In the meantime, we have been focused, as Steve has said, on our clients and also on our community. And so as most of you know, we launched the Greater Houston COVID-19 Recovery Fund back in March with the United Way. And it's really a historic effort. It's the first time that we've ever had a joint fund with United Way to respond to, in this case, a pandemic, although both of our organizations, both the Greater Houston Community Foundation and the United Way, have obviously been active in disaster relief for many, many years. But this time we decided that because of the unprecedented situation, it really would benefit the community for us to leverage the strength of both organizations to serve in a truly collaborative fashion. And so the goal of this fund has really been about maximizing the use of philanthropic dollars to fill the gaps that are needed to protect our most vulnerable neighbors. And we have been focused on 4 counties: Harris, Fort Bend, Montgomery, and Waller. This fund has a task force that governs it, which is made up of board members from the United Way and board members from the Greater Houston Community Foundation. We have a grants committee, which Mary Vasquez from United Way, who you will hear from in a few minutes, is co-leading with Diana Zarzuelo, our Senior Director of Community Philanthropy, along with staff members from both the Greater Houston Community Foundation and the United Way, along with program officers from the Houston Endowment and Arnold Ventures. And these teams have been working very hard. So moving on to the next slide, we are excited to announce we have raised $16.6 million. We think that's pretty amazing given that our whole community has been suffering. We've been going through a recession. We've got, the oil and gas sector in great pain, but Houston always rises to the occasion. And so we've had many generous donors. Some of you who are participating today have given to the fund. But really, it's been outstanding to see individuals, families, private foundations, companies, many of our donors step up in really amazing ways. And both United Way and GHCF have really conducted that fundraising together. We have had a focus on moving these funds really quickly to benefit the community. So we have already granted $10.5 million. Our last round of grants was $8.2 million distributed through 65 nonprofits. The focus areas of the fund have really been focused on food assistance, emergency financial assistance, basic needs and housing, services to prevent homelessness due to evictions and foreclosures, financial and housing counseling, legal assistance, and then disproportionately impacted communities. And I'll talk about that in just a minute in terms of what we mean there. Of course, there's more need than we are able to meet with this fund. And so we've also been really collaborating with other foundations to share information and align funding. We know there also has been a lot of public funding. Probably you have followed the CARES Act, which is, the stimulus bill. And we've been really looking at who's been left out of those federal funding benefits. So for example, in our community, immigrants, undocumented, and mixed status families where one person may be legal and one may not, have really been left out of all of that federal funding. We've also had very high claims for unemployment, but unfortunately not everyone is being served well by that system. There's just a huge backlog and very long wait times. There are also types of contract workers who have had difficulty applying. So we've been really keeping all of those things in mind as we make our grants. We have had an open process in the sense that on our Recovery Fund website, we've been taking inquiries from the nonprofit community. So we've had over 400 nonprofits submit inquiries telling us what kind of work they're doing, what their needs are, and our grants committee have vetted all of those. And then based on that, we have invited organizations to apply for funding that fit the focus areas of the fund. So we're working on the last couple of rounds of grants right now. We expect that all the funds will be distributed by August 15th because this really was meant to be a short and medium term fund. And so you will see some new areas coming in those final grants, but we will continue to support the basic needs distribution of food, financial assistance, but also some system-focused grants to help special populations. And so we're working on those right now, and we'll be sharing more information about that in later June and July. I want to point out that part of the reason why we are having so much difficulty in the community and so much need for financial assistance is that unfortunately before COVID-19, we were a region that had great disparities and a lot of economic insecurity. So most of you know we had launched Understanding Houston back in November. Before COVID, we were very excitedly sharing data across the community through what we called our big picture convenings. We had actually already reached 500 people in person just between January and February and early March. And one of the key takeaways that we were sharing was the level of economic insecurity in our region. And so I just want to point out that while poverty rates may not look that high in our community, if you take into account the ALICE threshold, which is asset limited, income constrained, and employed people, and this is a study that our own United Way did, we can see that in our community, 27% of all households are ALICE, okay? And if you combine that with those living in poverty, we have about 40% of households that don't have economic security. Now remember, that was before COVID. 40% of families didn't have economic security. One measure of that you probably saw in the Houston area survey before was people said they didn't have $400 of savings to get them through a crisis. So when you compound this level of economic insecurity that we had before COVID with the level of job loss that we saw because of COVID, you can understand why we've had such grave needs for financial assistance across the community. And so it's just important to keep that in mind. We have a lot more data on Understanding Houston about economic insecurity across the region and other needs, but also we have several blogs about the impact of COVID on our community. I want to talk now about our disproportionately impacted communities. So one of the tasks that the COVID-19 Recovery Fund Task Force and Grants Committee took really seriously was, because the purpose of this fund was really helping vulnerable populations, we wanted to look at what was happening to vulnerable populations during this crisis. And many of you may have heard and read the research that while the pandemic, of course, is impacting everyone in different ways, no one likes to be quarantined, everyone's afraid of getting sick, there's definitely an impact for every single person across our nation and really our world, but that there are people who are disproportionately being impacted. And, this is the research that's been done on this is really showing that because in low-income communities, minorities and low-income people have more underlying health conditions, the stress of poverty, and also just the overrepresentation of minorities in jobs that are classified as essential workers, that is driving more exposure to the pandemic and more cases of COVID-19 among our African American and Hispanic low-income populations. So in order to really understand that impact in our region and have that lens help inform the grant making of the fund, we looked at several layers of data together in order to determine which communities were being disproportionately impacted. And we looked at the number of COVID-19 cases per 1,000 residents in the region, unemployment insurance claims, and pre-existing poverty conditions. We did this for across the region because we're serving these few counties. Within the city of Houston, this lined up with the priority neighborhoods also identified by the city of Houston. And you can see on the map where these communities are. And if you're interested in more information, you can also find that on the Greater Houston Recovery website. And so you can see, you can dig deeper if you want to. Before we turn it over to the panel, I just want to give you a sense, because I've gone very fast, of what kind of information we have on the Greater Houston COVID-19 Recovery Fund website, because there's a lot of information if you would like to learn more. So you can see the homepage, and let's go to the donors tab, Allison. you might be interested to know, have your clients given to the fund? And so you can see the list of donors on this page that we update regularly. We were really excited. We've had quite a number of very large gifts, both from foundations, corporations, and individuals, as I mentioned, which is really exciting to see. You can go to our grantee tab. So we've given to over 67 organizations, and you may be curious to know, well, who are these organizations? Because you might have an interest, or you might know a client who has an interest in giving to a similar organization. So all the grantees are listed here, including the amount of funding they receive. Certainly, if you have curiosity about any of these grantees and you want to learn more, one of our team members can help you with that if you don't want to inquire directly. I also want to show you where our nonprofit inquiry form is at the top. So if you are in contact with a nonprofit and they're saying, I want to learn more about the fund, I'm interested, this inquiry form is the way for them to do that. So they give us some information about their mission, what county they serve, and then we process that and look at that through the grants committee. Now, I will say, as you know, we have not that much funds left to give out, so we're not trying to raise expectations greatly about that, but at the same time, we are still open, and we always are interested in learning about new nonprofits and what nonprofits are doing, because our donors also ask us about that. We also have the disproportionately impacted communities information there. We have information about the task force. So there's just a whole lot of information on that website if you want to know more about what is happening with the COVID Fund. I will also say, just briefly, I think many of you know that the Greater Houston Community Foundation is also administering a COVID fund for the Harris County. And that is a separate fund that came from public dollars. And we're in the midst of that grant making right now as well, which will be serving about 20,000 low-income individuals through nonprofits with direct financial assistance. So we've been really pleased to serve the community in this way. It has been a great partnership and collaboration with United Way. We've greatly appreciated the help of the Houston Endowment and Arnold Ventures in the grant making process. And of course, the really hardworking nonprofits who are working on the front lines every day to make a difference in our community. And now we are excited to hear from our nonprofit partners, and I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jennifer Touche, who will make those introductions.
Thank you, Renee. And I just want to remind everyone we love to hear what you're thinking. And so please use the Q&A section. If you have questions for Renee or questions about what's happening in the community, or even just want to tell us something that you're involved in, or that you know that's happening on the ground with nonprofits you're involved in, or questions from clients, even if we don't address it on the webinar right now, which of course we will try to do, we want to hear what you're thinking. So post things in there, let us know you're there. So we're really honored to have a great panel of speakers who are joining us for the rest of the webinar to really give you a glimpse from on the ground of what's happening in the nonprofit sector, from where they sit. They are on the front lines. They are all super busy. And really, I just want to express on behalf of the Community Foundation, we're really honored that you're taking the time away from serving people to spreading information about what you're seeing. And one of the commonalities between these three organizations is you are organizations yourselves and experiencing the crisis in your own ways as an organization, but you also all partner with other organizations. So you partner with arts organizations, with schools and libraries, and of course with United Way, with many human services organizations. So you have an internal view, but also a bigger view of what's happening in the nonprofit field. So in addition to being great leaders of your organizations, what you bring to the table is really eyes and ears from many, many different nonprofits in the sector. So first of all, thank you. And the only other thing in terms of context is nobody has a crystal ball, so I'm not going to pretend that I have one. I know there are questions, a lot of questions about what's going to happen with the nonprofit sector. It's been hit really hard, just like our economy has. The nonprofit sector is a big part of our economy. And they're needed more than ever to recover from the crisis, to address the ongoing outcries from our community about racial injustice. So now is not the time to move away from nonprofits. Now is the time to lean into them, to figure out what you can give, whether it's financial, ideas, innovation. The nonprofit sector is really hurting. Many are going to survive. A lot of nonprofits are not going to survive. Lots are going to adapt, and I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen. So we are grateful that we have a strong sector here and we have generous people. But it's going to take more than we've ever had to do before to really lift up our nonprofit sector here in Houston to bring our community forward. And I know we have a lot of creative people on the call listening who are professional advisors and bring even other ideas to the table. And so we invite you to lean into that conversation, whether it's with these 3 nonprofits or others that you're involved in. So with that sort of overall context, I will quickly introduce our speakers. We do have their bios. I think they're going to pop up in the chat. I know we'll send them afterwards, so I'll just give you the one sentence. So I'm going to do them in alphabetical order. We have John Abadili, who is the CEO of Houston Arts Alliance, whose principal work, the Arts Alliance, is to implement the City of Houston's vision, values, and goals for its arts grant making and for its civic art investments. We have Julie Baker Fink, who is the president of the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation, whose mission is to improve lives through the power of literacy. I will also say that Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation is a supporting organization under the umbrella of Greater Houston Community Foundation, so we get to work with Julie quite a bit on their operations. And then Mary Vasquez, who comes to us as the Vice President of Community Outreach for the United Way of Greater Houston. She helps lead the grants committee for the Greater Houston COVID-19 Recovery Fund. She has, we're lucky to have in our community, sadly, she's worked in a lot of disasters and works with a broad range of counties, leading many of the long-term recovery councils in many communities. So she's busy. We're all busy, but thank you, all of you, for being here with us today. So what I'd like to do is ask each of you, give you each a few minutes to tell us in your own words a little bit about your mission, what you're doing right now. I'm going to throw a lot of questions in your intros and give you guys each 4 or 5 minutes to talk about this, a little bit about how you're adapting, and then to the point of where you sit in terms of really touching lots of other organizations, maybe a little bit about what you're hearing from those organizations as well in your introductions, and then we'll get into questions. So I will stay with alphabetical for this first question and ask John, John, you may be sharing screen with us, so hopefully you're set up to do that, and just let us know if you aren't. So welcome, and thank you, John.
Thanks. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for your time. HAA was set up about 12 years ago through a public-private partnership. In addition to our service to the city for its arts investments, we raise a modest amount of private funds every year to help artists and nonprofits do their work in the community. So after Harvey, for example, we launched a disaster response program that is firing on all cylinders right now. We also have a racial and other equities program in operation, and we do research on the arts, et cetera. So I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in the arts field broadly. It's true at HAA, of course, but I can speak a little more inclusively about other arts nonprofits and artists in town. We've been collecting data about impact, and we've seen a 25% unemployment rate happening in the arts industry right now. Nationally, artists and entertainers are suffering from the highest unemployment rate. It's about 55%. So Houston's doing slightly better than that, but still it's kind of rough. After the PPP loans run out, after this new extended 24-week period, we're looking at a 33% unemployment rate in the arts industry. That is employees. Our artist contractors are suffering even more greatly, with over 50% of artist contracts canceled. That number goes up when you look outside the nonprofit art. So a lot of artists and creatives make their money off proper gigs, bars, churches, festivals, things like that. And the rate's even higher when you start to look outside the nonprofit arts. What that means is you've got people who can't feed their families. You've got people who can't pay for their rent or their utilities. And in fact, what Renee named in terms of the highest needs among high poverty communities matches what the artists are telling us. So food insecurity, housing insecurity, utilities assistance is needed, things like that. HAA has been working with a collective of arts organizations to help these folks respond to the crisis. We have also been tracking what's been going on in our organizations. So in addition to launching an emergency relief fund for artists, because many of those artists fall through the cracks of unemployment or they fall through the cracks of other social service safety nets, we have been monitoring what's going on in the arts organizations, and what they're doing has been quite remarkable. There's been a tremendously quick pivot to online digital programs. That means that our arts organizations are continuing to provide community building value in Houston and in the region. They are maintaining employment as much as they can. They are digitizing and monetizing online programs as much as they possibly can. And it's been a real strain. We've recently done a needs assessment, a deep dive, one-on-one interviews, a few different survey sources. We're hosting town halls and collecting data from them. And I'll show you quickly the information we're gathering, and this is just a draft. But here is our, let's see, here is our first page of our dashboard. We are looking at information regarding their primary needs, their reopening plan, whether they've gotten SBA loans. Same for individual artists. Are they on unemployment? What have they been experiencing as they access public assistance or attempt to? Mental health monitoring. And I will highlight here just a few of our recommendations for this community. We are looking currently at mental health needs that we need to fill, digitizing programs. So that is a new skill set and needs development, as does monetizing those programs. That is a very heavy need. Individuals are looking for support as they cut their financial expenses. They are looking to pivot into online fundraising modalities. They are also looking at leadership crisis. So what do our organization leaders need? And I'm sure this is common to the entire nonprofit community right now. Because we think about this two ways. One, our nonprofits are an employment sector that needs to stay strong so that the pandemic doesn't get worse. And two, our nonprofits are the ones who are there to solve exactly the problems that the pandemic is causing. And I want to encourage this community to reconsider the arts as essential. We sometimes think we don't need to provide the arts to people, we just need to provide them food. But I would argue that that is selling short the very individuals that deserve the opportunity to assert their existence, to talk about their experiences, which is what the arts do and what the arts give our community, our kids, our adults, all of us. So I would argue that the arts indeed are essential, that they're a key part of our human existence, and that they will be an absolutely critical part of our recovery.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate that, that perspective. And just to be a little personal, I have two kids that went to Kinder HSPVA, so I also don't want them to be, they don't need to be employed yet, but so we hear the call for artists. They're really an essential part of the fabric of Houston in so many ways. So thank you for your work and for sharing that information. I'll turn it over to Julie now to give us an overview of where you are and what Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation is doing.
Good morning, and thank you, GHCF, for providing us the opportunity to speak today, and to all of the people on the call for their philanthropy responsibilities and stewardship with their donors, and then themselves being part of the generous philanthropy community here in Houston. And the Barbara Bush Houston Literacy Foundation was formed in 2013 by the Bush family to advance Mrs. Bush's legacy in the cause of literacy. We work with a coalition of about 50 nonprofit organizations, in addition to the major school districts here in Houston, as well as both public library systems, the Harris County Public Library and the Houston Public Library. So we call that our Literacy Partner Network, because we know, given the circumstances here in our community, with many children, 60% of them entering kindergarten lacking reading readiness skills, 1 in 5 children in 3rd grade not reading proficiently by the end of that grade level, and then again, new data from the international study on literacy and numeracy skills at adults shows that an estimated 1 in 3, we've been saying 1 in 5, 1 in 3 Houston adults are reading at a functionally illiterate level, and that means below a 4th grade level. So we've already had a crisis happening in our community around low literacy. And so, with regards to the systems of the pandemic and really the devastation that we've seen, both to closures in our public library school network, our school district network, and then of course our nonprofit network, has been hit very dramatically. With respect to the nonprofit community, a lot of people in our network provide in-school services or after-school programming or weekend programming. A lot of our adult literacy providers provide on-site services where people can earn their GED, get certifications, get help with unemployment applications. And again, we have a lot of programs ourselves that have all been, of course, upturned given the circumstances. And so many of us rely on fundraisers, and I think that John would say the same. That more than half of our budget internally is on fundraisers and events. And with the pandemic hitting in March and everything closing, many of us have had to, in the case where we can postpone events to the fall or have to cancel them, we're seeing significant reductions and shortfalls in revenue. I'm anticipating a 20% reduction in our budget forecast for this year, and that's kind of conservative. Many nonprofits that we work with are seeing more than a 50%, projecting more of a 50%, and it's because of the way in which we've been fundraising and relying on events, gatherings, where now there are a lot of limitations on those gatherings. We also provide programming, and I love the word John used because I use it too, and it's called pivoting. And many of us have had to pivot to make progress and to also prosper. And so it'll be interesting to see, I think many nonprofit organizations won't be able to recuperate through this hardship. And we anticipate this not just being evident here through 2020, but also through 2021 as we deal with the pandemic, the economic situation, but also the infrastructure that enables people to get back to work, both childcare, other services, that we need that infrastructure up and running as well for families to get back to work. Another thing that we've seen also is the needs of families, and I know Mary and of course Renee did an excellent job talking about just basic needs. And one thing that we like to shine the light on at the foundation is the need for supports for our education system and our child care system, because many of you probably personally, having children at home, have struggled with supporting your child's learning. And I think we all have an increased and greater respect for our educators and our education system because we've had to serve in that role. And so we've had to shift our programs, and the education system and the child care system, it's continuing, there's continued fluidity in the circumstances surrounding reopening, the structures and the modalities of education that we're grappling with and have had to turn. And I'm very pleased. We have an amazing but small and mighty team at our foundation, and we've had to cancel some of our programs and to completely shift them. In fact, each year we host, in partnership with Children's Museum of Houston and HISD and a number of other nonprofits, a summer learning program called Camp Adventure. And it's been a face-to-face program for kindergarten through 5th grade children at 3 schools in the 3rd Ward, Sunnyside, and the 5th Wards. And we had to cancel those because we don't have access to schools, and again, with the limitations and around convening and gathering. But we've been able to pivot quickly to redesign that program to be a hybrid approach. And so we're still doing registration. We're going to serve 600 children this year. And quite frankly, it's one of the largest summer programs here in Houston. It's free for underserved families. And so they'll register and they'll actually come and do curbside pickup of a large kit. We're calling it an adventure kit that'll be filled with all kinds of activities and books and lesson guides and everything but the water that families will need for a full day, 5-day learning experience. And then it'll be augmented by digital resources, online videos and tutorials on the experiments, all STEM, reading and arts related. So we're really trying to do our best. We have another program called My Home Library that we've had to shift as well. And I know we'll get into a little bit more details, but we just want to recognize that education, is important too, and families are struggling with two things. One is they're very concerned that they don't have resources and the adequate wherewithal and training to support their child's learning at home. And secondly, they are very concerned, just as we are, about ongoing summer learning loss and learning loss altogether. It's always been a problem with children of economically disadvantaged families and also English language learners. And for our community, that's a significant proportion of our children. 74% are economically disadvantaged. About a third of our children in our schools are English language learners. And when you compound that with not just being out for summer, where we do have summer, a lot of summer-based programs typically, it's being compounded by the fact that schools and our infrastructure closed in early March. And then just one small point also is that we're seeing that nonprofit organizations, again, the ones that provide summer-based programs, are canceling them altogether. We also have a lot of children who were accepted into premier programs at the high school level and all of those have been canceled. And so, and then we also, those nonprofit organizations who have been able to step up and make accommodations, they're only going to be serving 25 to 35% of the capacity that they normally would. So it's a huge hardship for our families, and also recognizing that they have been a conduit for bridging the summer learning gap. And with that, I'll stop talking, and I know we'll get into it more later, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. So, yeah, you've hit on a dual impact: the learning loss, and then also childcare. Lots of, in some ways, people going back to work, but their kids don't have anywhere to go, and people are having to make really tough choices about that as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Mary to tell us a little bit about your work and the work of United Way, and then also I do want to ask, I know Mary has a story about a client, but if you'll tell us about your work and then go into your client story, and then we'll circle back to other folks too.
Wonderful. Good morning. Thank you all for being here today. It's a pleasure to be with you all to talk about the great work we are all doing in the community to address this unprecedented need. Our United Way of Greater Houston's mission is to engage caring people to improve lives and build a stronger community. One of the programs that I provide leadership for is our 211 Texas United Way Helpline. And our 211 is one of the largest call centers in the nation. We answer over 1.3 million calls for a 33 county region during the day and 70% of Texas after hours and on weekends. And what we know is that our 211 data is demonstrating that the needs have never been greater in our community. Normally we answer 1.3 million calls a year. To date, in 2020, we've answered over 619,000 calls from individuals seeking assistance, which is a 21% increase over this same time period last year. Our top needs are around basic needs: rent and mortgage assistance, utility assistance, and medical assistance. In addition, we've had over a significant number of calls, about 25,000 calls from information about COVID testing since the governor announced that 211 was the number to call about COVID testing sites and information about that. Over 100,000 individuals have specifically said to us that their needs are greater now due to COVID. We've answered calls for 50,000 individuals in the last couple of months alone regarding rent payment assistance, 26,000 calls for electric assistance, 16,000 calls for food pantries, and 16,000 calls for public benefits assistance. We know what we're hearing from our agencies are that basic needs providers are seeing significant surges in need for their services. Many agencies that received reimbursement for fees or for the government services have suffered significant losses, particularly if they weren't able to deliver the services anymore the way that they used to. Perhaps they're having to do virtual versus in-person visits, and that does not allow for the reimbursement from some of the government contracts that they have. Many agencies are being very nimble, and they potentially are shifting their model. Some of our children's programming agencies cannot provide the services in the traditional manner anymore, but they are being nimble to be able to deliver food to those families and children that they normally would be serving. Some of our nonprofit partners through our affiliate agencies that United Way funds and our basic needs grantees are helping meet that need, but the need just is exceeding the amount of resources available. We are also, through our United Way Thrive initiative, helping with some of the job loss that's being experienced by providing employment coaching, financial coaching, vocational services for those individuals that are being affected. I wanted to introduce you to a client that was in need of services and that we were able to help through the Greater Houston COVID-19 Recovery Fund. That fund has really enabled us to be able to amplify the services that are being delivered in our community. And so we're so grateful for the Greater Houston Community Foundation for partnering and leading this effort to engage donors in this work. So Claudia called our 211 Texas United Way helpline, and she is a veteran. She called and spoke to our Veterans Services Initiative Specialist. She was referred by Michael E. DeBakey, Veteran Administration, and the Harris County Veteran County Services Office because she was just desperate for assistance. She needed rental payment assistance and electric payment assistance for the month of March and April. Claudia is one of those families that's a mixed status family. Her husband has citizenship issues and worked in the oil and gas and construction industries, and he was furloughed as a result of COVID-19. So they were significantly behind on some of their basic needs, and she was in desperate need of food for her family of 4. Our 211 veteran specialist helped Claudia and provided referrals to 4 different agencies that were funded by the Greater Houston COVID-19 Recovery Fund. And through those connections, Claudia was able to receive pledges for her March and April rent and her utility and assistance that she desperately needed. She was able to get food assistance that allowed her to be able to feed her family. And so during a follow-up call to Claudia, we learned all about all the support that she was able to get, and she really expressed deep appreciation for the funding that had been able to help not only herself, but many service members, veterans, families, and immigrants in need through the Greater Houston COVID-19 Recovery Fund. So that she's just an example of one of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that will be helped through our community and through these wonderful nonprofit partners that are meeting the need at this time.
Thanks, Mary. John or Julie, if you guys want to talk a little bit about the clients that you're serving, maybe a particular one. And I do want to remind people to put questions in the Q&A box if you have them. We should have time to address a couple of questions from you all, but John, why don't you talk a little bit about some of your folks?
Yeah, we know a woman who opened she's an artist, and she opened an art school. So she makes the majority of her money on teaching the arts. And our stipend from the emergency fund was only $600 for her, as it has been for everybody, but she was able to reopen her school online and start making money again with that. She directed many of her instructors too, the people she employed, to the fund, and it bridged this gap they had between doing in person to doing online. So in that way, our fund has helped. We've given out over about 410 $600 stipends based on the generosity of our donors, and it has helped. It was done one of 2 things, right? It's jump-started careers like hers so that they could resume making money. Or it has bridged their needs to get on unemployment. There was this gap, before contractors could. So we had one artist who actually has a studio near my home here in First Ward, was able to get on unemployment, but the $600 got him from early March to the end of April when that stuff kicked in from Texas Workforce Commission. So that's been a pretty critical piece too. But I would say, you know, just it's such a modest amount of money that our artists are leveraging pretty aggressively to get back to work and start rebuilding many parts of the community.
Yeah, taking time, you know, people having to have a little bit of space and time to figure out how they can redo their programming or get their organization running remotely, not making any money in the meantime. Sort of a bridge grant, bridge loan is to be helping a lot. So Julie.
Yes, we were contacted by the Salvation Army here in Houston, and they have a family residence program, and through those they had about 550 residents. And one of the things that they normally see on any typical year is that they're very transient. They don't serve a consistent population because they're moving in, they're finding a place to live, and they don't necessarily need to stay there. Well, that's not the case now. And so they reached out because they had about 100 children, 35 of whom were in school who they don't have any books in their family residence program. And so they were wondering if we had any books to donate, not just to serve their children, but also for their adults, because they really just didn't have a lot of things for them to do in the environment. And they had a computer lab, but they weren't able to allow people to use the computer lab. And we just don't think about those things through our daily work, that people wouldn't have access to, a computer lab. And so we were talking about how else we could support them aside providing 1,200 books to them. I also had asked about the means for the children who were school age and participating in distance learning, and the children did not have access because, again, they couldn't go to the computer lab to participate in the distance learning provided with and connecting with their teachers. And so we were able to provide tablets for each of the school age children at the family residence so that they could engage with their teachers and they could access all of the free digital materials from, books from the public libraries to all of the resources that the school districts are making available, as well as everything. I know a lot of companies across the globe have contributed free content for during this phase. So we were very pleased to be able to provide, some of our most vulnerable families and their children a means to stay connected, learn, and to work together.
Thanks, Julie. So, one of the questions we posed to all of you beforehand, and hopefully you've had some time to think about it, it's not putting you too much on the spot, is what can people do to help? We know money is needed, and let's not be shy about it. If you haven't already given and you can, please do. There's, lots of places, and they're going to need it for a while. Are there other services, other kinds of support? Obviously, volunteering is changing, that either your organizations or the organizations you serve, the things that people can do either from home or whatever that you're seeing is a need now or could be a need in the near future. That the folks on this call and others can think about how they can help.
I'm happy to kick that off if you'd like. We rely a lot heavily on volunteers. Last year, we mobilized several thousand volunteers to serve being reading mentors to kids in schools, as well as to help us to create home libraries through our My Home Library program. And so there's still opportunities for virtual volunteering. We're hoping that there'll be more opportunities, to implement, using social distancing to get more people involved in the fall. But for now, we did launch a program called We Read, and we've called upon the community to spend some time, recording themselves doing a read aloud. Again, we're sharing those with school districts and through our nonprofit partners. And so we're encouraging them. We have over 100 submissions thus far. And we're very fortunate to work with HISD. They've been able to, we've had 2 reading mentorship programs that have been face-to-face, and we've been able to turn those into virtual programs through the summer school. And we anticipate that those programs will continue to grow and be delivered in a virtual means this fall. And those are Read Houston Read and Reading Roundup, where again, you can be a classroom read aloud mentor for children or a one-on-one reading mentorship. And so if this is something that you're interested in learning more about, or your clients are interested in getting their families involved in, serving as a mentor, a digital mentor, that's something that you can connect with our team on. And then the other thing with regards to not just volunteering, but pro bono services, a lot of you have expertise, or your clients that you represent have expertise. And this is a time where nonprofit organizations need you most. We've had a great relationship for the past 7 years with Deloitte, and they've provided us with strategic counseling, strategic planning, with all types of services. And so we love pro bono services because we can't afford them, and many of them can't afford them now. And so, whether it's financial, helping to revise their budgets, doing, again, financial assistance, even looking at investments, new investment strategies given the economy. And then, of course, in kind. Many families and a lot of our organizations that, for example, some of the adult literacy providers need computers, they need laptops to give to their students so that they can continue with their coursework, or to get the certifications, or to provide that assistance, but they just don't have them at home. And then again, there are a lot of families that don't have books in their homes. And so, book drive, we can coordinate book drives with you and drop offs at our storage unit and quarantine them, and then find organizations to get them out into the community. So those are just a few ways, outside of financial resources. And then the one thing that I would just say about financial resources, be sure when you're giving guidance and counsel to your clients about if they want to invest, is to make sure that the organization has the capacity and the ability to execute on their programs that they're investing in. And again, that's something that we've had to make shifts in our programs. We're not able to do everything. We've created some new programs and to shift the way in which we deliver programs. And so that would be just something, to consider as you're working with your clients, to make sure that you're asking the right questions of the potential recipients of those generous donors, that they can execute and to serve families in this critical time. So thank you.
Thanks, Julie. I want to remind people that you can put questions in the chat and the Q&A, but I want to get Mary and John in there to talk about ways to help. Mary, you want to?
Sure. I echo the sentiment about we are in desperate need of volunteers to help the food bank and the food pantries in town to distribute food to those that are in need. And they have implemented safety protocols that allow for curbside distribution without having to come in contact with individuals. So we do encourage individuals to volunteer through one of those food pantries or with the Houston Food Bank at this time. And if individuals are looking to help, we encourage you to go to the Greater Houston COVID-19 Recovery Fund to think about if there's any of your individuals that you advise to look at opportunities to give through that fund to help amplify the work that these nonprofits are doing.
Yeah, I'd say something similar. I think the opportunity, the moment at hand is not just about filling gaps, which is a thing, right? But it's about innovation and taking advantage of the opportunities it presents. So a lot of our arts organizations have gone digital, family programs that are digital, exhibitions that are digital, in addition to social distancing, physical experiences. And I think what a lot of them need, particularly smaller and mid-sized organizations that have lower capacity, is some guidance on optimizing technology. That would be huge. I think there's a huge opportunity there, and they could use some help from anybody who knows better than they do. The second is digitizing those digital events. So if any of your clients would be interested, or if you would be interested in not providing money, but instead providing service, those are two major areas. Financial reorganization. So our theaters are facing a brand new business model. It's higher expenses in security and sanitizing process, lower income because they cannot sell as many tickets. And so anyone who can come in and work through with them a different business model, since their business model is traditionally on razor thin margins, how do we revise and make this work in the new era? That would be huge. And then of course, if you got money, $600 goes a long way for our emergency relief fund for artists and other arts workers as well.
Yeah, and I think legal services, I totally agree with John about just new operating models and how do you do that and create efficiencies with the people and the resources that you do have. So all of those, and I know that we all have probably advisory boards and organizational structures like that would lend themselves to actually serving in a capacity. So again, if you or any of your clients, I know we all have connections to make for you all in doing that.
Great. Thank you. And we are happy to connect. I mean, obviously we did their bios, and we have, I think, links to all of our speakers' websites. And I just want to say thank you again to our speakers for joining us today, for all of the work that you're doing, for your creativity, your passion, and just look forward to supporting you as our community moves forward. And I'll kick it back over, I think, to Susan to close us out. And again, let us know if you have questions, and if we can't answer them in the next 2 minutes, we'll send something to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. Thank you again, Julie, John, and Mary, for your time this morning. Such great information, and we're so appreciative of the work that you're doing. And again, just spending your time. We know how busy all of you are. I also want to thank my team, Renee, Jennifer, Steve. I get to represent all of you all the time, and I love that part of my job because y'all are all so brilliant and great at what you do. So I'm so appreciative of that. And lastly, I want to mention, because you don't get to see them, but Allison and Alicia are here helping us to coordinate everything. Made me feel a whole lot better about this morning. It's a good thing I'm not doing that. They are just a really talented group of people that have brought all of this together, not for just this webinar, but for many of them. So again, as Jennifer mentioned, if you have additional questions, you can certainly just reach out to me. I'm happy to filter them through wherever they need to go. And we will make sure that those get answered. We will be sending a follow-up. There's a recording of this, as I mentioned at the beginning, that will go out. So not only to you all, but to others that might have missed this. But if you do have someone you think would be interested, certainly forward that along. And again, if there's other questions, happy to help where we can. But again, we appreciate your time this morning and hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
And Susan, Mary, Julie, I dropped my email into the chat box. There you go. Yeah, if you all want to do that too, in case anybody wants to get in touch.
Awesome.
Thank you guys. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you again. Renee, do you have something?
No, I was just going to say thanks to everybody, and we really appreciate you taking the time. We appreciate everything you do for our donors and clients every day, and we hope you're all staying healthy and well.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.